And now to make the final changes on the garment. Measuring down to where the new seam is, and go up a little bit above that so you don't have to back tack, and you can overlap stitches for 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and then gradually I'm taking it in along that basted line. And if you remember, I mentioned when hand basting, when the seam is vertical and the outside of the fabric is facing you, and you're going to mark the seam, you mark on the right side. That way when you flip the fabric wrong side out to sew, the seam that will be showing when under the sewing machine will be basted. After the initial curve at the top area of the new seam, if you remember, it's a straight line 1/4 inch away from the original seam. So I can just follow the check pattern or follow the original seam as my guideline. And keeping in mind that leaving the original seam intact until I finish stitching this new seam will help hold the layers of fabric in place. To take out the old seam, I like to use a small seam ripper, and I pop the stitches, break the stitches on one side of the old seam, and then pull them away from the other. This way they come away from the garment easily. Sometimes in a more fragile fabric, if you just pull the old stitching out, it will damage the fabric. And it's much slower and more tedious to do it that way. I also see absolutely no reason to trim these seams down. They're 3/4 of an inch from the hip area to the waist, and now that I've taken the skirt in, a whole inch down the hip, but that's not too much. So rather than go to the time of taking them out or cutting them down, I will leave them. When I first put this skirt together, before the initial fitting, I really thought it was going to be a better fit. If your fabric is fragile to work with and you don't want to have to possibly stitch on it a second time, then hand baste your garment together for the first fitting, or even pin fit it. And now to press the new seams, certainly press them flat first to embed the stitches, and then press them open. Getting rid of all of the basting thread down the side seams. And now to press the back darts flat so that I can re-stitch them. They're going to be made a little bit deeper at the top and longer in the length. Having been a seamstress for a very, very long time, a lot of things I do without marking with chalk or thread. For instance, these darts. If you find that it's more helpful to use a mark, a thread mark, or a chalk mark, do so before you sew the dart. I'm measuring the depth of the dart, and I know what the width at the very top is. I was taking it in 1/4 of an inch on either side and comparing both backs so that they'll be exactly the same. Again, this check pattern on the fabric is very helpful. Remember not to back tack at the tip of a dart. It creates a dimple. So it's better to leave a long tail of thread and tie it off. Taking the old dart out will help this dart in pressing. Sometimes it won't be necessary. I think usually in a lightweight fabric it wouldn't really matter. But on this, it will help the fabric roll in the direction that I want to press it. Now here's a little trick. This fabric is somewhat thick, and the back darts are rather wide at the top. Pressing may create a little bulk if I press it all to one side. So what I'm going to do is slash the dart, not completely to the tip because that would weaken that tiny little area, it would fall apart, but slash from maybe where it's 1/4 of an inch deep in the dart, or 3/8 of an inch, whatever seems logical so it won't fray, and then zigzag those edges. And we'll press it flat from the waist down to the folded part, and then from there we can either press it flat or press it to one side, as you'll see in a moment. You can also do hand overcasting, but this zigzag is just fine. First, pressing flat to embed the stitches. pressing the slashed area open. And from there down, pressing it toward center back. The waistline across the back has no ease stitching, and I know that it's going to be a little bit bigger than where I want to set it on the waistband, so I'm going to run 2 rows of stitching, 6 to 8 stitches per inch, a normal basting stitch or whatever works on your fabric, and I'm going to run it right along the seam line or a fraction inside the seam line, and then between that and the edge of the fabric. Having 2 rows will enable me to pull that basting thread and the seam will remain flat rather than curl up, which makes it very difficult to sew. You can see that the skirt extends about 1/2 inch more than the thread mark for center back of the waistband. That's why I ran the gathering stitches or the easing stitches. This fabric is loosely woven enough that when I gather that in and steam it, it will never look like it was gathered at all. Aligning my center back, waistband, and skirt. And gathering lightly those stitches, the easing, so it fits, so that the skirt fits into the waistband. By hand basting the waistband first, it will enable me to sew a smoother, straighter line under the sewing machine. Also, it helps me to align this waistband back onto the skirt. Checking the alignment of the waistband and also to see if the center back seam of the garment matches the center back of the waistband. Right there. And now to repeat the same process on the other side. Aligning the center back of the waistband and skirt. Remember, on this side of a lapped zipper, the teeth of the zipper extend past the center back seam. And there's the easing in the skirt to be worked in. Now let's check the easing from the dart in the back to center back. Measure that and then compare on this side. That way I can control where the easing is so both sides look exactly the same. What I'm doing is holding the waistband so that when I embed the needle, I'm going into the seam allowance where the tape is, the hem tape, and I can feel that I'm not grabbing any of the interfacing. By hand basting this down first, this also gives me the ability to handle that interfacing so it does not slip and get stuck in the seam allowance, which would make it very bulky and difficult to press flat. Also, I'm checking to make sure that the waistband at center back on both sides is sitting at the same place horizontally. It's extremely easy to have one side of the zipper, the waistband at the top of the zipper, be higher or lower than the other side. And even if it's a 1/16 of an inch, it doesn't look nice. It doesn't match. And with a normal stitch, permanently stitch the waistband into the skirt. Checking the inside along the checks to make sure everything looks correct. And now to do the hem, remember that the backing of the pleat will be hemmed independently of the skirt. And I'm going to use the hem tape. Center the hem tape along the edge of the fabric and do a normal stitch close to the edge of the hem tape that is overlapped on the fabric. Hold the fabric and the hem tape taut. You want them to be the same length, and I give it a little bit of tension pulling either direction so that it doesn't shrink in any way. When you stitch over seam allowances, make sure that they stay open or pressed to the side that they were intended. Otherwise, you'll have a problem when you go to fold the hem up and press it. With a single thread, I'm going to hem the skirt with a tailor's catch. So I anchored the seam allowance area first, and then you take a little bit of fabric from the top, go diagonally down into the hem tape, and take some fabric, and continue this way across the entire skirt. And now to address the box pleat back. Pinning the hemlines together. By leaving a little tail of the hem tape, I can fold that under and stitch it. Hem tape like this tends to fray terribly, so in most cases I like to roll it under. If this fabric was very thin, I would handle the seam at the hem of the box pleat very differently. Being a heavier fabric, if I sew them like this with all of the seams facing out, there's much less bulk when pressing and the pleat lays nicer. Doing this also helps me anchor the back of the box pleat, so when I stitch the seam allowances with a sewing machine, it's already stabilized. So I'm laying the fabric under the needle. I'm sewing through 1/2 of the back and the box pleat lining from center back over to the seam allowance, turning a right angle and going straight down. And repeating the process on the other side. This time I'm starting at the edge of the box pleat seam allowance and going toward the center back. By removing the basting stitches, you can see how nice the check is. It all blends together. There's no break in it. Using the press cloth will help keep the fabric from shifting and also will give me the ability to put a lot of pressure on the fabric without the possibility of leaving a shine. To stabilize the box pleat so it doesn't shift and perhaps drag, fall down a little bit, I'm going to sew across the top of it at the top of the opening at center back. So first I want to lay the skirt flat and pin through the back of the skirt and into the box pleat, not into the front of the skirt. I'm taking a double thread, right now I'm simply basting this across. Later I can go back and make tiny little prick stitches. The next steps will be to prepare and insert the lining, complete the waistband, and any remaining handwork.